Have you ever missed someone so much that even silence feels heavy? What would you do if someone from your past unexpectedly showed up at your door? Can a simple visit bring back years of memories and change the way you see life? Tonight's story is about one quiet evening that did just that. The late afternoon light stretched through the lace curtains of Margaret Hale's home, painting delicate patterns across the wooden floor. The quiet inside her little house had a rhythm of its own, the ticking of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, and the gentle creak of the old rocking chair by the window. For most people, silence was emptiness. For Margaret, it was simply what remained after years of noise, after laughter that used to echo through these rooms and footsteps that once filled the hallway. Her husband James had been gone for 3 years, and though time had softened the ache, it hadn't taken away the hollow that followed her through each day. Every morning began the same way, cup of tea steeping beside the window, the same view of maple trees lining the street, and a stack of unopened letters from friends she meant to reply to someday. Her life was simple, predictable, and safe. And yet, beneath that calm surface, something quietly stirred, a longing she couldn't quite name. It wasn't for romance or adventure, but for connection, for warmth, for the feeling of being seen again, not as the polite widow everyone admired for her strength, but as a woman who still had dreams and heartbeats of her own. That afternoon, as she dusted the photo frame on the mantel, her gaze lingered on a picture of her younger self standing beside a boy with a crooked grin and bright, curious eyes. Her nephew Ethan, he had been 12 then, all energy and mischief. Always asking questions, always seeking stories from her about the world. He was the kind of boy who made ordinary moments sparkle, just by being in them. But that was a long time ago. Now, Ethan was 26, living in another city, busy with work, and rarely in touch except for the occasional holiday message. Margaret had told herself she understood that young people had their own lives to build, but every time her phone buzzed, a quiet hope flickered that it might be him. Most of the time, it wasn't. Outside, clouds began to gather, soft gray shapes drifting together as if the sky, too, felt the weight of her quiet longing. The wind rustled the branches of the maple trees, carrying with it the faint scent of rain. Margaret moved to close the window, then paused when she noticed something unexpected. A single yellow leaf fluttering in, landing gently on her kitchen table. She smiled faintly at it, tracing its fragile veins with her fingers. Funny how something so small can find its way in, she whispered to herself. The sound of her own voice startled her. She rarely spoke aloud when she was alone. It reminded her that she missed conversations, the kind that didn't need effort or planning. When she thought about it, the only person who'd ever managed to draw her out of that quiet space had been Ethan. She remembered the summers he'd spent with her, chasing fireflies in the yard, asking her to tell the same bedtime story over and over. He used to say she made everything sound magical, even when it wasn't, because you see the good in things. He'd told her once, with that boyish certainty only children possess. That memory brought a smile and a faint ache. She wondered what he saw in life now, just as she was about to return to her chores. Her phone lit up on the counter. The name on the screen made her freeze. Ethan, for a moment. She thought it must be a memory, one of those ghost notifications that appear when you least expect them. But the message was real. Greater than asterisk Aunt Maggie, I'll be passing through town tonight. Mind if I stop by? Asterisk, her heart gave a small, startled flutter. She read the message twice, then a third time. A warmth spread through her chest, not just happiness, but something quieter and deeper. Greater than asterisk, of course, sweetheart. I'd love to see you. Asterisk, she typed back. Then she stared at her own reflection in the window, the faint lines near her eyes, the silver threads in her hair. She wondered what Ethan would think when he saw her now. Would he still recognize the woman who once ran barefoot with him through the fields, laughing at summer rain? The thought made her chuckle softly. But it also stirred something she hadn't felt in a long time: anticipation. She moved through the house, tidying without really noticing what she was doing, straightening a cushion, setting out a fresh candle, opening the windows to let the air breathe. She told herself it was just hospitality, just routine. But deep down, she knew it WASN, single quotes. It was hope, the fragile kind that blooms quietly when life surprises. You is something good, as dusk began to fall. The first drops of rain tapped gently against the glass. Margaret stood by the window once more, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. She didn't know why Ethan had chosen tonight to visit after so long. She didn't even care about the reason. All she knew was that something inside her, something still alive, still waiting, whispered that this night might change more than just her evening plans. The rain had not yet started, but the clouds outside Margaret's window hung low and full, as though they too remembered something they couldn't quite let go of. The kettle began to hum softly on the stove, its steady sound weaving through her thoughts like a quiet heartbeat as she set out 2 mugs on the counter, one for her, one for Ethan. Her hands paused on the smooth ceramic surface. The simple act brought back a rush of memories she hadn't expected. There had been another time, many years ago, when she'd done the same thing for her husband. James, he had loved rainy evenings like this one. The world feels slower when it rains, he used to say, smiling as he'd pour them both a cup of tea. Makes you notice things you usually miss. She smiled at the thought, even as her eyes softened. James had been a man of few words, but deep kindness, the kind of person who made the ordinary feel sacred. It was that quiet steadiness that had first drawn her to him. When they were young, she could still see it so clearly. The first day they met at the community library. She had been shelving books, half lost in thought, when a book slipped from her hands. Before it could hit the floor, someone caught it. James had looked at her with that small, crooked smile she would later come to love. "Guess I got here just in time," he'd said. And she had laughed, not because it was funny, but because there was warmth in his voice that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in years. That was how it began. Not with grand gestures or sweeping words, but with something small, a shared glance, a quiet kindness, a spark that didn't ask for attention. Over the years, their love became woven into their everyday lives, in the way they cooked together, in the late-night talks by the window, in the silence that didn't need filling. And when he passed away, the silence remained, but now it felt heavier, as if even the house missed his presence. Margaret took a slow breath, shaking her head gently. She had learned to live with memory, not as a wound, but as a companion. And yet, tonight, something about Ethan's visit made the past feel closer. Like an echo returning from somewhere, she thought. She'd already walked far beyond. She glanced again at his message on her phone. There was something in the way he'd written it, something humble, almost hesitant. It reminded her of the boy he once was, curious, affectionate, and a little unsure of the world. When Ethan was young, he used to follow her around the house, asking endless questions about everything. Why do flowers close at night? How do you know when soup is ready? Why do people cry when they're happy? She had always answered with patience, sometimes inventing whimsical explanations just to make him laugh. It was in those moments between laughter and learning that she'd grown to love him like her own. But time had a way of taking what was once constant and scattering it like autumn leaves. After James passed, Ethan visited less. He had been finishing school, then finding his place in the world. She understood life moves forward, but there were days when she'd open her front door expecting to see him standing there, only to be met by the quiet of her porch now. Thinking of him driving through the rain to see her, she felt a familiar ache return, not painful, but tender, a reminder of how deeply she still cared. She moved to the piano in the corner of the room, an old upright she hadn't touched in months. Her fingers brushed against the keys, hesitant at first, then pressing one softly. The sound drifted through the house, warm, nostalgic, imperfect. James used to say her music made the house feel alive. Ethan had loved it too. As a child, he'd sit by her feet, eyes wide with wonder, asking her to play the song that sounds like the stars. She never told him the name of the melody. She liked that he'd given it his own. She began to play it now, slowly, quietly, each note carrying the weight of the years between then and now. The sound filled the house again, wrapping around her like an embrace from memory as she played. She thought about how easily love hides in ordinary things: a shared cup of tea, a melody that lingers, a message on a rainy day. When the last note faded, she let her hands rest on the keys. For a moment, the air felt still, suspended in that gentle silence that only follows something meaningful. And then a flash of light appeared outside the headlights of a car turning into her driveway. She stood there for a moment, heart fluttering with both surprise and something she didn't want to name just yet. Hope, perhaps? Or maybe the quiet joy of being remembered, as she reached for her shawl and walked toward the door. The first drops of rain began to fall, soft and rhythmic against the glass. The night had arrived, and with it, a feeling that the past she thought she'd left behind was about to meet the present in ways she couldn't yet understand. The first raindrops tapped gently against the roof as Margaret opened the door. There he was, Ethan, standing in the soft glow of the porch light. Hair damp from the drizzle, coat slightly crumpled from the drive. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world seemed to pause in that quiet doorway. She studied him, noticing the same bright, attentive eyes she remembered from childhood, now shadowed with the subtle weight of adulthood. And in his expression, she saw the curiosity and care that had always been there, unchanged, yet deepened by time. "Hi, Aunt Maggie," Ethan said softly, his voice carrying a gentle warmth. Margaret smiled, feeling her chest lift slightly. "Ethan, come in. You've been driving in the rain?" He nodded, stepping inside, shaking off the chill and hanging his coat by the door. "Yeah. I thought it was better to visit now than wait for a sunny day." She couldn't help but notice the careful way he moved through the house, familiar yet aware of the changes. He glanced at the old piano in the corner, his eyes lingering for a beat longer than necessary. "I remember this," he said quietly. "It hasn't changed much," Margaret replied, a faint smile touching her lips. "You used to love sitting by it." He did not speak immediately, simply letting the memory hang in the room like a soft thread connecting the past to the present. Margaret led him to the kitchen. Pouring warm tea into the mug she had set out earlier, she handed one to him, and he took it with both hands, as if savoring not just the warmth, but the familiarity of the gesture. They sat across from each other at the small kitchen table. The room smelled faintly of herbs and rain, the dim light creating a comforting cocoon. Neither of them rushed to speak. And that silence, filled with years of memory, was itself comforting. Finally, Ethan broke the quiet. "You look different," he said, but there was no judgment in his tone, just recognition. "Stronger, maybe, and calmer." Margaret chuckled softly. "I think the years do that. Or maybe it's the silence teaching me patience." He nodded, looking down at his tea, swirling it slowly. I should have visited sooner. I didn't realize how much I missed you until recently." Her heart tightened at his words. She wanted to say something comforting, but instead she simply nodded. "Life gets busy," she said softly. "And sometimes people drift without meaning to." Ethan's gaze lifted, meeting hers with an intensity that wasn't demanding, only honest. "I drifted. I've got caught up in everything else, school, work, trying to figure out who I was. I didn't mean to leave you behind." Margaret reached out, lightly brushing her hand over his. It was a gesture full of warmth and reassurance, not familiarity or intimacy, but a human connection that carried decades of care. "You never left me, Ethan. I understood. I've always understood." A quiet smile spread across his face, mingling relief with the nostalgia of memories long tucked away. I forgot how much it meant to me. These little moments, the way you always listened, the way you noticed things no one else did." She smiled back, feeling the quiet bloom of affection in the room. "Sometimes," she said, "we don't realize how much the small things matter until they come back to us." The rain outside had grown heavier, a soft rhythm against the windows. The sound made the kitchen feel smaller, warmer, and safer. Margaret poured herself another cup of tea, and this time they spoke more freely, letting words drift in gentle conversation. They talked about books Ethan had read, projects he had started, small victories, and quiet struggles, every now and then. They laughed softly at shared memories, the sound bridging the gap of years. A story about a childhood mishap with a garden hose brought a grin to both of their faces. And Margaret realized how much she had missed these simple, unguarded moments. There were pauses, too, not awkward, but full of unspoken understanding. They didn't need to fill every silence. Each glance, each small gesture carried meaning. The way Ethan's eyes softened when he spoke. The gentle nods Margaret offered, and she remembered a detail from his youth. It was in these small exchanges that something quietly shifted. The gap of time and distance, which once felt insurmountable, melted into something gentle and familiar. She realized that even after years apart, the bond they had shared as family was alive, more alive than she had dared hope. Finally, Ethan stood glancing at the window where the rain blurred the world outside. "I'm glad I came tonight," he said, voice low but steady. I needed this." Margaret felt a lump in her throat. Not sadness, but a tender awareness of the gift this evening had given her. "Me too, Ethan, me too." As he stepped toward the door to leave, they paused. A shared glance, warm and unspoken, lingered between them. It wasn't about attraction or desire. It was about recognition, care, and the quiet reassurance that connection, genuine, lasting, meaningful, could survive time, distance, and life's changes. The door closed softly behind him, leaving Margaret standing in the dim glow of the kitchen. Her heart felt lighter than it had in years, and for the first time in a long while, she smiled without reservation. Sometimes, she thought, the people who matter most are the ones who return when you least expect it, bringing the past and present together in a single, tender moment. The house was quiet now, the storm having passed, leaving behind only the gentle patter of rain dripping from the eaves. Margaret stood by the window, watching the streets glisten under the streetlights, her heart still humming with the warmth of Ethan's visit. She hadn't realized how much she had needed this evening, not just the company, but the reminder that life's meaningful connections could be rediscovered when least expected. A soft knock at the door drew her attention. Ethan stepped inside again, hesitating for a moment in the doorway. "I didn't want to leave without saying one more thing," he said softly. Margaret set her cup of tea down and looked at him, sensing the weight in his expression. "What is it, Ethan?" she asked, her voice gentle. He took a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to speak a truth he had kept tucked away. "I've realized tonight that I've always looked up to you. Not just because you're family, but because of the way you see people. The way you notice things others don't. The way you make small moments feel important. I missed that. I missed us." Margaret's eyes softened, and she reached out to touch his hand lightly, a gesture of reassurance and care. "Ethan, you don't need to explain. I understand more than you know. Life pulls us in so many directions, and it's easy to lose sight of what matters. But coming back here now, that says more than words ever could." He smiled, a mixture of relief and quiet happiness. "I wanted to make it right. Not because I feel guilty, but because I want us to remember what we have even after all these years." Margaret felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Not from sadness, but from the depth of emotion that filled the room. It was rare to find someone who understood the heart without needing to speak in grand gestures or explanations. Ethan's words were simple, yet they carried the weight of honesty and care. "You've grown into such a thoughtful young man," she said softly, "and I'm proud of you. Not just for what you do, but for who you are. And tonight reminds me that bonds like ours don't fade. They just wait for a moment like this to shine again." He nodded, eyes shining. "I'll visit more often. I promise. I don't want to let time slip away again." Margaret smiled, warmth filling her chest. "Then we'll make new memories, just like before. Maybe even better ones." They spent a little more time together, sharing stories of recent events, small triumphs, and quiet joys. Each word, each laugh, each glance reinforced the connection that had never truly faded. It was a reminder that family, love, and understanding could endure, even across distance and years. When it was finally time for Ethan to leave, Margaret walked him to the door. He paused in the doorway, looking back at her with a soft, thoughtful expression. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything. For listening, for caring, for letting me come back." Margaret placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "Thank you, Ethan, for returning, for reminding me that even in quiet lives, love finds a way to reach us." He gave a small nod, then stepped out into the rain-damp night. She watched until his figure disappeared from view, leaving the house filled with the gentle echoes of the evening's warmth. Closing the door, Margaret leaned against it for a moment, breathing deeply. She realized that life had a way of teaching patience, of showing that connections are never truly lost, they simply wait for a moment. When hearts are ready to recognize each other again, sitting back down by the window, she reflected on what the night had offered her: understanding, healing, and the quiet joy of being seen. There was no grand epiphany, no dramatic revelation, only the truth that meaningful bonds endure through time, distance, and life's uncertainties. In that gentle, reflective moment, Margaret understood that emotions, deep, honest, and respectful, had the power to heal hearts. They could bridge years of absence, soften loneliness, and rekindle warmth in ways words alone could not. She smiled softly to herself, a serene sense of peace settling in her chest. Life was not measured by the hours that passed, but by the moments that touched the heart. Moments like tonight, moments of honesty, moments of connection that reminded her why human bonds are so precious. The rain had stopped, leaving the world outside washed clean and glistening under the streetlights. Margaret sat quietly, sipping her tea, feeling a gentle hope blooming within her. She knew that tomorrow would bring the usual rhythm of life, but now her heart carried a quiet, enduring light, the knowledge that love, care, and understanding could always find their way home. And in that understanding, she found herself smiling not just for the evening, but for the many small, beautiful moments yet to come. Asterisk.